Being part of a mastermind has its innate benefits, one of which is gaining perspective from thought leaders in various industries. In today's episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook, we've done just that. We've put together a mastermind episode taking a handful of the best insights. This episode is jam-packed with valuable information you'll be able to apply immediately. Let's dive in.
You're a huge advocate of data. Educate us a little bit about data. You talk a lot about dirty data problems. Why is data important, and how could enterprises, companies, small, large, medium, use it to push their mission ahead, whether it's more sales, it's better customer service, better products? Tell us a little bit about why you think data is so damn important, and what can we do about it to take advantage? Because I've got a lot of data and don't know what to do with it necessarily sometimes.
So it's actually very easy to create data. People do it all the time. Everything you interact with, there's logging that's going on, all these kinds of things. So there's tons of data. Your comment on what to do with it, I think usually you start with the question and then say, can the data answer the question? One of the really interesting parts there, if you look back again, let's go pre sort of the current AI generation. But if you look back and say, what does a credit score do? The credit score answers a question. Are you going to pay me back? Right? So if you start with that as being your question, then you say, what kind of data do I have that can inform me as to whether or not this person will pay me back? So I like the idea of starting from the question and then say, what data do I need in order to do that? So as you know, with a credit score, people will say, hey, do they pay their bills on time? Do they have a large outstanding balance? How much, whatever income do they have? These kinds of things. We don't do anything with credit scores, mind you. But, it's one of those things where I think if you sort of look at it from the question side, it becomes easy to know what data would be most interesting. The problem that people have is that a lot of times the data that they think they have is not as good as it needs to be. And I see this all the time. People will come present to us things, and they'll always start with, "Oh, our data is fantastic. We have this great stuff. These are the people who have bought products from us. We know everything we need to know about them." And as soon as you do some just really, really basic analysis, you find there's missing fields, there's typos, there's standardization issues, there's duplicates, there's all sorts of things. And if you start going to try to build a model using data like that, you end up discarding a lot of things that might be good. You end up duplicating things, so you bias your model out in some way. And just overall, the very first part, and I think most people you'd ask, the very most important part of building any model is making sure that the data you have, that you're starting with, is good and robust and has as few biases inside it when you begin. It needs to be closer to a random sample. If you say, here are all the people that purchased something from me, that's great, but what about the people that didn't? Right? So you start ending up with these like little microcosms of, oh, this works, but it only works for this type of thing. And that's why I think we see a lot of this sort of, issue in the data space just popping up all the time. Oh, it didn't work. Oh, it did work. Oh, it only works here. Oh, my stuff's dirty, so I got a bad result back. A lot of it comes back to just prepping and understanding what that data is to begin with. Really, really important.
Kevin, I literally dealt with this last week. So we were building up for a big leadership conference. We put something together here for my own, for my LA leadership team, which was how to 10x their world, right? And it was personal and it was business. But one of the things we were trying to do is, what if you got rid of 80% of your clients tomorrow? What would happen? And one of the things we had to do is a little bit flipped of what you did. First, I got a bunch of data that some other team had done, and they had not done a good job. So guess what happened? The data didn't make any sense. So we had to restart. So that caused a lot of time and delays. Next, instead of saying, let's look at all the clients that we didn't generate any revenue from, I went in a different direction. I said, let's find clients that we did generate revenue from. And then we pulled some data on what it took to get that revenue. And when we presented it to the team, people were shocked because they said things like, that's crazy. Because we had generated revenue, we thought that was a decent client. And the data said that was actually a losing proposition. And it's hard to argue with revenue, right? There was one client, we had generated $140,000 in revenue. But when I showed them what it cost, and both emotionally and time and money and resources wise, that it no longer made sense. And I had to remind them, guys, when we look at the lost time and effort, we're talking about humans putting in this loss of effort, right? If it was just a button, who cares, right? At the end of the day, we drove revenue. But one data said that 90% of the work we had done with a client had led to lost or washed jobs, meaning we had done a bunch of recruiting for them and it had led to just the position went away, which means it was just a waste of time and effort. And people were involved in this, both on the candidate side and my recruiting side. So the data really told an incredible story. But we had to start with a question, which was, what client did we generate revenue with that was a losing proposition? And that's how we went about it. I mean, it was really mind-blowing to my staff on how much time and effort was wasted on the wrong clients. I mean, this is how incredible data is.
Sometimes even prepping the data itself is like that can become an interesting thing. Like again, most people are familiar with one-hot encoding, but if you start off and you say, let me use the color of a car to make a prediction of something, maybe whether or not the person speeds, let's say, right? How do you model that? How do you encode that? Like, what kind of blues are there? And so in our world, a lot of times we just turn things into, binary answers, yes, no. So we say, is the car blue? Is the car light blue? Is the car, dark blue? And they may even have percentage answers. It's 20% dark blue and 30% normal blue and, whatever, some percentage black, let's say. So really prepping the data, even if you have good data to begin with, that prepping step is also extremely important to make sure that when you go and start building models, that it makes sense for the type of data that you have. If it's descriptive, then a lot of times things like this one-hot encoding is a really, really helpful thing. But on the other hand, if you have numerical data, you can use different types of algorithms to model that type of stuff out. And if it's a continuous function versus discrete, these are my price points. The last thing you want to see is a model that says, hey, charge $9.99 for everything. And you look at it like, we already are. Right? So you want to know, can I charge $19.99, right? Or should I only be charging $7.99? Would that work better? So just looking at the data and really prepping it before you start building models is really the most important aspect of it. Some models also work better with different types of data. So again, specific to our case and what we do a lot of, we find that there's a lot of very weak signals that when you add them all together becomes a strong signal. But individually, each thing it doesn't really answer your question. You need a big group of them together. And so there's algorithms called boosting algorithms. We'll use gradient boosted trees for a lot of work or things like this. They take very large numbers of parameters in, as opposed to maybe 3, 4, 5. We may put 100 or 200 in and see what comes out there. And again, because you have a large number of these sort of weaker indicators or weaker signals, just understanding how the algorithms perform with different types of inputs is also really important, because you can take the same data, model it with different algorithms, and you'll find wildly different, not so much just results, but the confidence or the accuracy, the goodness of what comes out of those models will vary quite a lot.
Besides dirty data, what are some other what are like the biggest data problems you see companies are dealing with, and how does Versium, we can kind of do full circle, how does Versium deal with that? How do you solve these problems?
Yeah, so one of the ones is, you've probably heard the saying, I don't know what I don't know, right? And so with the sort of death of third-party cookies coming, the advertising world, especially online, is struggling a bit with understanding who are their customers in the first place. So in sort of nerd speak, you would call it secondary external data. We like to call it just third-party data appends. But being able to identify a user in your data set, again, it could be a client, it could be a prospect, it could be whatever, just somebody that you know something about. Is there a way that I can add additional information that maybe you don't know, that I know, that would help inform your model? These can be really, really basic things, right? It could be like, hey, have they bought a car in the past 30 days? Yes or no? Like, you have no idea. What kind of car did they buy? How many cylinders does it have? How often did they flip their car? Did they buy a luxury car? Did they buy an economy car? Did they buy a sports car? What color was it? You start thinking about all this, and in your mind, you're probably thinking, well, I don't care what kind of car they bought. But what if it turns out that there's actually a signal that correlates strongly with some purchase propensity that you have? I'm sure you've heard already, that's fairly well published, right? That like the iPhone users tend to spend more money than non-iPhone users. And so a lot of e-commerce sites will bump up prices if they determine you're surfing them on an iPhone. Wow. Same with a Mac. And so there's like little quirky things like that. But you would, if you didn't know to look at it, if you didn't even look at it in the first place, then you wouldn't have been able to find that out. This is pretty widely published. So if you search around, you'll see all sorts of articles about that.
That's amazing. So Kevin, basically, if I'm a car manufacturer, a car dealer, I might look at John and say, you know what, John's below my spending budget. He's not going to be able to afford a Porsche. But then you say, wait a minute, if you look at the data, the last 6 cars he's purchased, each time he's spending 15% more. He must be on his way up. We are right there in the 15% range. So he could be a customer, right? This is typically someone I would skip, is not in our budget, don't advertise, don't waste your money, but maybe it's a lost opportunity there. Would that be a good use case?
It's fantastic. Actually, we did a study sort of like what you just described. And the question was, I got to be a little careful with some of the names here. There's a luxury car manufacturer, which everybody's heard of, that's out there. And the question is, what kind of car do they have in their garage before they purchase one of ours? And we went down the list, and we did some analysis, and we came up with another car that's very unlike this particular. This is a sports car that I'm referring to, and the car that they have in their garage is not a sports car. It's an SUV. But if they own that SUV, the chance that they're going to purchase this sports car in the next 3 years, it's like 80%. It's pretty high.
Interesting.
Yeah, there's some weird.
So they're
weird
done
things
with
like
their
that.
gigantic Yukon, and they've raised their kids, and now they want a sports car. Let's go, Porsche, right?
Something like that.
Yeah. That's brilliant. You're right, because then otherwise it's, this person's had 3 SUVs in a row. They're gonna buy another SUV. Let's bow out of this customer race. That's crazy. Nice. Okay. So you feel like these boosting algorithms help solve some of these data problems?
They do. Again, you really need to look at things, from what is the question that I'm trying to answer, and then what data do I have, or what data might help inform an answer there, and then what's the algorithm that works best with the type of data I have and the way that I can represent it. And that's really our approach to things. We're very good at modeling our own data, so when we add it to someone else's data, that becomes pretty easy for us.
You speak and write on data literacy and decision intelligence. Tell us why that's such a passion of yours, and why it's even important. Let's say a listener doesn't run a technical company. How is this still relevant to them, to a mid-level employee?
I think that's kind of the challenge. The name data literacy and decision intelligence, they sound technical. And that's probably the problem, because I'll talk to, let's say, for the average 100 people that I talk to, as soon as I open my mouth and I say data, I don't even get to literacy. They're like, checked out, time out. No, I'm not a data guy. I'm not a data lady. I'm done. To better understand and answer that question, data is everywhere. So have you ever looked at a review on Amazon before you bought a product? Like I just bought a coffee pot a while ago. I had to look and see the reviews. Now, those reviews are qualitative, but they're still data. Now, hypothetically, if the first review said, this is the worst coffee pot in the world, don't buy it, I wish I could give negative stars, what do most of us do? Most of us, just human nature, is I say, okay, let's look at the next one. But the next coffee pot, my question would be, okay, well, what was their criteria? Maybe they wanted a coffee pot that had high volume, and this is a 1 cup. Maybe they wanted one that was, they wanted variety. They wanted to do iced coffee and hot coffee, and this was not. So that question, that answer to me, that feedback, wasn't enough to answer my question. So I go to the next one, and our brains don't work like that. We see a negative response, like, oh, not for me, time out. It's kind of teaching us that critical thinking approach of working with the data. So once we understand that data is everywhere, every decision you make is going to have some level of data. We don't want to be misinformed. We don't want to look on the news. We don't want to look in current events. We don't want to see charts that look like they're saying something, when because we don't have the skills to question them, we don't go that way. And at the end of the day, it's not a technical skill. Data literacy is not technical. It's critical thinking. It's questioning. It's understanding very basic math, that if you can understand a denominator from like 2nd grade, you can be data literate. There's no technical skills involved. But again, the name puts people off, I think.
I actually agree with you, Kevin. About, I don't know if you and I spoke about this offline or not, but about a month ago, we did a 10X conference with my company. And what we did is, one of the things we were focused on is 10X decision making, and how letting go 80% of the stuff that they do, including the clients that they work with, could 10X their career. And we did a very thorough data analysis, and we presented it to them. Because what was happening is people were saying, yeah, but that client we've driven revenue with. We were like, great, let's see how much time you spent to drive that very little revenue. And people were shocked with the data that we put up. Talking about data literacy. For the first time ever, They saw it in their face of these wonderful clients, how much time and effort we had put in for that very little revenue, and what we could have done instead with that time. So I think it's huge. We're a tech services organization. We're not a pure technical company, but so they don't get too much data fed to them, but understanding how their time and effort is wasted in certain places was mind-blowing to some of the staff members. It was very powerful. Kevin, in turning data into wisdom, you present a 6-phase, 12-step process to help organizations make data-driven decisions. Tell me a little bit about that, about the evolution of data literacy and inform the creation of this process.
Yeah, well, I think in general, anytime there's a systematic process, it helps people, especially even in unlearning, right? If you have a process written down that's codified, it's a lot easier to follow it than if it's just kind of up in the air. It helps with that. And then it's also systemic. What I mean by that is it thinks about unintended consequences. It thinks about the technical side and the soft side. And so the process, interesting enough, working in data does not start with the data, it starts with the decision. And I think that's where most organizations fail is they say, here's my data dump for my marketing campaign, go find me some insights. And you're like on a wild goose chase. It's a needle in a haystack. You have to say, what is the decision? Up front, you have to understand the decision criteria. What's the risk? What are the constraints? What does good look like? Before you can go into finding the data, because if you go all the way down, the chances are you're going to come up with a great insight that has nothing to do with your organization that you can't act on and potentially even harms the organization. So the model is like a flipped decision model. Start with the decision to be made, question to be asked, find the relevant data, looking at both qualitative and quantitative data, do the right analytics. But then after you get the insight, the key is check it for bias, check it to validate the assumptions are accurate, get different perspectives, understand if there's any logical fallacies involved, and then it goes on to making the decision and communicating it. But a lot of organizations forget that validation process. They forget that it might be prone to bias or they might have an incorrect assumption. The analytics might be right, but an assumption could be wrong.
Nice. Is there any real life examples from your case studies in your book that an organization significantly benefit from applying the principles outlined in it to grow revenue, to grow EBITDA, to increase their company assets mentally and physically?
Absolutely. And I'll share a couple. I'll share a personal story in a second as well, because I think sometimes it helps resonate how it impacts not just business, but personal. But we have studies where because the organization is answering the question to be answered up front, the decision, they're saving the all of the time doing analysis on a needle in a haystack. They have improved decision efficiency by close to, it was like 60 or 70% just by following the process. On the flip side, we have other case studies where people are adding the validation process, checking for bias. In that case, it might slow the decision process down a little bit because you're getting different perspectives. But at the same time, it improved, I forget how it was calculated, but improved the efficiency and the effectiveness of the decision by twofold, meaning they weren't going back and saying, oh, this was a bad decision, let's relearn from it. And I mentioned that validation process is critical. So I talked about my kids a couple of times, just a quick story to put that in perspective and put the value on it. My oldest, the one with mental health challenges, was having behaviors at school, punching, kicking, all these things. They were going to kick him out. They took data. The data was, here's like 26 behaviors in this week. And so I said, okay, well, I got to question it. Let me ask more data. What time of day? What day of the week? Because the theory was maybe it's right after lunch, maybe it's after recess, maybe it's Monday over a weekend. So they go back and they do it, and like, nope, still escalating. Doesn't seem like a pattern. And I turned to my wife and I'm like, I smiled. I said, I got this. So they built all these nice line charts and bar charts. They were about to expel them, which means from a money point of view, I probably have to buy a private education, which is really expensive. And one of the things in the data was it was the behavior, it was the antecedent, and the consequence. The consequence for like 95% of them was he was going to the principal's office. And the assumption they made was kids don't like going to the principal's office. I said, well, my son has autism. He loves going to the principal. So we called him in. Hey, how was it? Great, Dad. I kicked the teacher, sent me to the principal. She read for me for 45 minutes. I think I'm going to punch someone tomorrow and see if I can get 2 hours. All the teachers' jaws just dropped. And I said, it's okay. Like, you made an assumption. But when you talk about the value of that materially changed my son's life because now he was still in the school system. He didn't have to go change my financial life because I didn't have to pay for private schooling. And all of their data, all of their analysis was right. What was missing from the process is no one questioned, is the principle a deterrent? They just assumed it was. So if that happens in personal life, you better believe it happens in business every day for millions of dollars, where it's a subtle thing like an assumption.
That is brilliant. And it's so important because you're talking about kids, right? And
Yeah.
we forget, I don't know what your son's name is, Kevin, you're welcome to share it, but this gentleman's going to grow up and he's going to have an impact on the world, and a more positive one because of that small issue that you uncovered years ago.
Absolutely. Parker is. I mean, he's a genius, computer genius. I mean,
I bet.
to the extent hacks into he does a lot of things he shouldn't do. He's probably on the CIA watch list, not for terrorism, but for being recruited because he's that good technically. But we just have to rein in the behaviors. But yeah, that saved his future. It saved us. So just in the process helped, because I stopped and I said, okay, how could this data be right, but not accurate? And like you said, question the answer.
So you had to really slow down to uncover something that everybody was skipping across. I'm surprised they gave you so much data to work with.
It took a couple meetings, and they didn't know my background, and they didn't know what I was asking. But the antecedent behavior consequence is a thing in schools when you have kids with that profile. It's pretty common to say, "Give me the ABC data," because they have to track toward goals. Are they progressing or not? I asked for the times of day, and I think at that point they wanted to help us, so it wasn't that hard for them to add it.
And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us, and I hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but it also helps others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avita Santablian, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.